Hey, welcome to Reforming Slavics today with myself, Nick, and Tom, my co-host.
Yo, what's up?
Today we're going to be talking about music, how Christians should view it, secular music in particular. Then we'll dive into some discussions about media and movies and books as well, because we all grew up in a Slavic community where there were very distinct lines between what Christians should listen to and what Christians shouldn't listen to. And as you get older, you realize those lines are not necessarily so crisp and clean, and there's gray areas, right? And as you get older, you learn to be a thinking Christian, a Christian who has to step into things that you would not necessarily don't talk about God or are not godly in your everyday life. And yeah, you have to find the little nuggets of truth and the nuggets of God's goodness that He had placed all over the world. And so we could actually start with music. I grew up in a Slavic Pentecostal church with my parents. Primarily the only music they listened to was Christian music that was produced by, Christian artists that were in the Russian community. And you'd have these artists go to your church, they would sing, and they would sell CDs afterward, and you'd buy that CD, and that was like the music you'd listen to in your car. And that was kind of the scope of musical comprehension that I had until, you discover your local Christian radio station, K-Love or KTVB. That was...
KTSY.
Yeah, and then Air One was already the alternative Christian music.
Yeah, it was for the cool KTSY listeners.
And so you'd kind of like start expanding as a teenager. And then we would go to teen camp and we would have speakers say, well, like, a lot of Christian music, well, it doesn't talk about God. They sing Jesus is my boyfriend songs, and like, how can you possibly listen to something like Awake and Alive by Skillet? Those guys are clearly demonic, and they just hype people up. Music should never introduce an emotion like that into your life. And that's like the push of the speakers, where like everything godly is classical, everything godly is calm and hymnal. And you can only listen to godly music. And so later on, you grow up and realize, oh, like, no, that's not even the scriptural point of view of music. Music has different kinds of attributes, right? There was music that was played for war. Mm-hmm. I doubt they played calm and joyful music when they went to war to kill other people in Israel's army, right? There's music for celebration where you are victorious over war, like the end of Exodus, not the end of Exodus, essentially the end of Exodus, when Israel crosses the Red Sea and they rejoice in a song about how God killed all their enemies in the Red Sea and they drowned. Yeah. So music in Scripture has particular aspects, and they are used to describe God, but in the Russian community, it was always looked down upon to listen to anything that is non-Christian, right? And so even if it's not necessarily inappropriate, it doesn't have any sexual innuendo or talk about rape or murder or anything like gangster rap.
Yeah.
If it was even rap, right? I remember in my teenage years, I was so indoctrinated into the fact that rap was bad that when I was introduced to Christian rap, like Lecrae, it took me forever to be comfortable with it. And it was just culturally weird to me until I ran into Shai Linne. And you can't deny Shai Linne's music being ungodly, right? He literally has lyrical theology. That's his style of music. And I really appreciated him for that. And then that gave me an opportunity to look at other music.
So I guess you're thinking about when certain Christians say that a style of music is somehow inherently sinful.
Yes.
Somehow that rock music, the guitars and the drums, when they're played in a certain way, it
conjures up the devil, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, there is maybe there is a hint, obviously there is a hint of truth in what some preachers were saying or people were saying during the youth camp. If you're just listening to music that's so generic that it could be talking about Jesus as your boyfriend, like obviously we don't want to listen to those songs during our Sunday service,
Yeah,
right?
like that's just bad Christian music.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bad Christian music. You should
Yeah.
probably listen to great secular music rather than bad Christian music. Just purely on a musical level, right?
Yeah.
Like
Not
there's
when you say secular, you don't mean like inherently sinful, right?
no, I just mean music that doesn't talk specifically about the Christian faith, right? There is music that is just like lyrically good, is just musically incredibly beautiful and has
Yeah.
nothing to do.
Like Sweet Home Alabama.
There you go, right? Country roads, and if you like if you're listening to Queen or you're listening to a clean version of an Eminem rap song, or like all these songs from our childhood, there are clean versions of them, right? And you like rap songs. I grew up in California until I was in fourth grade, and my indoctrination into music in the United States when we moved from Russia was just purely all gangster rap because that's the community I was in. And I was a kid, I didn't understand any of the significance of the bad language in it or any of the concepts they were speaking of. It was just music that, and that was deemed as really bad music. And truly, it talked about like the concept itself in the music is more important than the way it sounds. Like you can have, dare I say this, you can have godly heavy metal, and you could have very sinful, melodic, and very peaceful music that's demonic. Like those extremes do exist.
How do you discern that though in the lyrics?
So primarily, like we have to obviously address the fact that like music, and I'm not a music expert. My wife would be a music expert. She plays all the instruments, and she's really musically talented and knows a lot more about it. But music is supposed to invoke emotion.
Yeah, but
right?
you played the recorder.
I think everyone did in middle school. Music is supposed to induce emotion, right? Anger could be godly. And so you can listen to angry music that's godly.
Yeah, be angry but do not sin.
There you go. Also, there's a range of emotion, right? Excitement, thrill. All these emotions can be brought up by music. I mean, look at all the movies that have musical numbers. Like Pirates of the Caribbean inspires awe and adventure, right? And so music is used to accompany emotion. And you could have really Christian sounding music that's completely atheistic and ungodly. And you can have, music that sounds scary, that is trying to glorify God through other means. I think that's biblically sound. It's just we have a culture in which if something sounds a certain way, we deem it godly. And I think that's not necessarily correct.
Like, for what example?
Well, I just go back to, for example, Skillet. Skillet produces a lot, and I haven't listened to Skillet in, a decade. Now, I've listened to some recently, just it randomly comes up. Like, I actually cared to listen to Skillet for like a decade, right? And they are more of a harder rock, maybe a little bit metal, not really metal, kind of in the middle there. And they produce, like, God-glorifying songs. In fact, the main singer, I think his name is Alice Cooper. No, I forgot his name. Anyways, but he is like theologically sound. He actually speaks with Dr. James White, and he preaches to people, and he's into apologetics.
Alice Cooper. That's some other.
That's
a non-Christian singer.
Can you Google it?
Yeah.
And like in our Christian community, if you play that, that's horrific, right?
John Cooper.
See,
Alice Cooper is not a good. Like,
yeah, I think he's like a
that's
hardcore
a hardcore
demonic metal kind of, yeah. And then so you have to have like this discernment, right? Like, and it's also not bad to listen to songs that talk about hard things.
What do you think about a lot of people bring up like the way he dresses? Like he'll wear like eyeliner, and he has really dark clothes all the time. So they say that the way he's dressing is demonic because he's like he likes the dark style.
So the color black is Satan's already. I don't think so. I think the fact that John can wear black and smile and be friendly says more about, you know, Christian conservatives, specifically in the Russian community, who never smile, whose face looks like they want to murder you, and dress very, very nicely. Like, I would rather have the person who is welcoming. And again, I have my own stylistic preferences, and I think if you wear skinny jeans, that's a very bad statement in general. But hey, to each his own.
Yeah.
So I don't think aesthetic does play a role in the way you portray yourself.
He does talk about in his interviews how the way he dresses is a form of evangelism, and that he reaches a certain crowd of people that already enjoy that style, and that style isn't necessarily
it's not inherently sinful.
Yeah, you would have to bring up like some kind of scriptural basis to say like, hey, the way that you dress is sinful. And unless it's like dressing like a woman, which I would like maybe say some certain styles of like, like don't wear what a man would wear, for a woman, or don't what a woman would wear for a man. But of course, there's so much like subjectivity to it, then there's no way to absolutely pin down. It's very subjective to pin down what is sinful, what you dress, unless it's like very, very obvious.
Yeah.
Because a dress in Irish culture is what men would wear. In Nepal, when I was there, a dress was what actually men would wear. It was like a traditional dress kind of thing. But it's obviously, that dress was obviously for men.
Yeah. No, just feminine and masculine types of clothing. And the Bible is clear about that because that's talking about the roles of the sexes. But yeah, I think there should be and again, it's slow and difficult. But you have to recognize that like music itself can be really good and godly and not have a single word about Christ or Christianity in it. That's a possibility, right? And there's good music in life. And also you have to realize like you shouldn't listen to music as a Christian that talks about explicit sexual rebellion or murder or any of the things that the Bible prohibits. And like you can't, as a Christian, you can't really enjoy that. Not because you shouldn't enjoy that,
yeah,
but also your heart kind of rebels against it. And so you have this aesthetic in which like you have a framework and say like these things are godly, but these things are beautiful, and they necessarily don't speak directly about who God is, but God is giving the influence and the power and the talent to do so. And
so what do you think about like listening to secular songs that not like they're very broad and talking about certain things? Like, for example, well, I guess it is kind of, you have to look at your heart and how you're kind of entertained by this song. Like, are you entertained by this song because it tempts you? Like, it puts your fleshly desires like.
What do you mean by fleshly desires? Like, for example, if you're going to the gym, right, and you want a hyped up song, you could play some kind of clean version of a rap that necessarily might be Christian at all, right? I don't see an issue with that, right? If the lyrics are talking about how well you can achieve something in football, or lyrics talk about success in business, or just pursuing something and being incredibly inspired to do so, like those are all pursuits that encompass hard work. Hard work ethic is biblical, right?
Yeah.
And so there are aspects like that.
I remember like one time we were like going on this like youth trip, and a bunch of us were singing like All of Me by John Legend, and one person said, "Hey, stop singing that. That was made by an atheist." And you're promoting them, you're promoting their music, or
your iPhone was made by a CEO who's gay, right? Yeah. Are you promoting the homosexual agenda?
I don't know if they said that they were promoting it, but it was just kind of like illogical thinking, right?
Yeah, but that's the kind of ingrainment that we experience in the Slavic community, where it's like, no, all sorts of music must be written by a Christian or have a Christian influence in it. And I think we could we should separate from that and say like, music by itself can portray other things other than just things about specifically Christian doctrine or glorifying Christ. Christ is glorified through beauty as well, right? And sometimes music has no specific point to Christianity.
Yeah, because that song all it's talking about is a man saying all of his being, his mind, heart, and emotions is towards this other woman.
Yeah.
You know, it's not being specific. It's not saying whether it's in a, you know, in a promiscuous way, out of marriage way. It's just being very general.
Yeah.
It's like, if I see that towards a man and a woman in marriage, then it could glorify God.
Yeah, I mean, and you do have explicitly God-hating songs in our culture, specifically in our modern pop culture today. And yeah, I wouldn't want to listen to those things, but there is good music too that's, you know, written by other people.
What do you think? Want to go into discussion about like podcasts and like Joe Rogan?
Sure.
So when you're talking about like you wouldn't want to listen to something like explicit or that or this, but
yeah,
what do you think about listening to someone like Joe Rogan, where there's a lot of Christians that find him fascinating in the discussions he has, and a lot of his things are very explicit, with like bad words, and sometimes he just doesn't. Like, he has a very ungodly worldview. Would you agree?
Yeah, his
like
podcast can be very dirty, very sexually explicit, very provocative. Uses a lot of expletives. And, yeah, I fast forward through those. I don't like them. I don't like hearing that. It's unappealing. It makes you not want to listen, right? And there are some episodes that you're like, well, I'm just going to skip through that part real quick, and we'll get to the good part of it, right?
Because it's very, very broad amount of guests he has. Sometimes he has a comedian and they're joking about very sexual things, and other episodes he's talking to a scientist about like the age of the earth or certain fossils we found. It's like it could be very broad.
Yeah, and you have to use like you should be a thinking Christian. A thinking Christian can discern between someone who is non-Christian but has great material and truth, right? Like, they're not mutually exclusive. Like, people who don't know anything about God can have extremely valuable truth that they can provide to you, and you should take it, right? But there should be caution, right? We don't want to weigh into the fact that we enjoy the dirty material that's provided because we're just becoming like the pigs who goes back to their squalor, and we don't want to be like that as Christians. And so there has to be discernment there, right?
And I feel like, yeah, because we go like, why do we listen to these podcasts? For a lot of it is like entertainment. And
information, entertainment, learning, curiosity, right?
There is a lot of news nowadays, though, or YouTube videos, or like they portray they're very informative, but they're more like gossipy, and they're more entertainment if you're just being honest.
Yeah.
And like, we have to be careful, because that's like what the world is very hyped right now with like YouTube clickbait. You know, like everything is very towards that kind of provocative sense. Like gets into like politics and stuff like that.
Well, again, yeah, you do think about the things you feed yourself, and so you should feed yourself truth, beauty, and goodness. And same thing with other forms of media, like specifically movies or even books, right? As Christians, we were told never to read Harry Potter. Like, Harry Potter is like the wickedest book of all things because there were wizards and witches, and clearly all wizards and witches are evil and bad and corrupt, right? But as I grew up, I've learned that Lord of the Rings trilogy exists. One, I learned what it was. Two, and I fell in love with the actual trilogy. Same thing with aspects of
the Chronicles of Narnia,
and C.S. Lewis's the Space Trilogy, where there are elements of magic, but the way you should judge books about magic and wizards and all that, like for example, Lord of the Rings has a wizard, Gandalf. It's not the fact that it has magic in it. It's a fantasy world. Of course, it's going to have magic, right? The architecture of the world is not like the world we have here, and so you have to separate yourself from that. It's how they use the magic, what the magic was there for, right? In Harry Potter, the magic is used for selfish gain. The power source is always internal. You conjure it up yourself. It is the worship of self and the empowerment of self. Harry Potter doesn't really have to do anything. He's just endowed with this magical power. He's a wizard. Versus, and he uses it blatantly. Like he doesn't. They use spells for all sorts of things. In Lord of the Rings, Gandalf almost always tries to purposely avoid using his power until the very necessity in which it's designed for and given to him by a greater being. And so there is a good way a character in a fantasy can use magic that is God glorifying. And so you have to distinguish those. It's not necessarily about the fact that magic is bad. It's about the fact that what the magic is used for, how it's used for, and how the architecture of the world that the author created portrays it, right? Who does it give glory to? What is the use of it? And what is the ultimate purpose of the story?
I guess some pushback would be, well, isn't all magic witchcraft? And so we have to avoid it?
And then I would point you to the Old Testament. Was it witchcraft when Moses dropped his staff and it turned it to a snake? Was it witchcraft when a prophet threw a stick or stone into the river and an axe head that's iron floated up? Is it witchcraft when Elijah is being mocked by kids calling him bald and he talks and God sends a bear and mauls the kids? Is that witchcraft? Is it witchcraft for Moses to part the Red Sea? Is it witchcraft for Joshua to stop the sun in its place? Right? All these are magical things, right? They are in fact supernatural magical things, but they're always used for the purpose of glorifying God. If you compare Moses in the Old Testament and Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings, Moses was a wizard, right? We just refuse to use those kind of words in our Christian lexicon, right? Or our Christianese. But like the Old Testament is more magical than a lot of the books that we read today about fantasy. And so we see God use supernatural magic to glorify himself and lead his people. Right, and so I would say that read your Bible more carefully and see that magic is used by God to glorify him. And I'm not talking about there's good witches and good wizards in the modern world. No, the source of goodness and the way we view it in the supernatural sense, it's God. He is the source of all goodness, and we can't just go and create some kind of ward and start practicing magical things. No, that's going to the source of evil and demonic purposes. But we can see that not all magic is evil.
Yeah,
it's God's magic.
So you're saying in the context of the story of Lord of the Rings, it's obviously not real, but what it's doing is portraying a story that is showing good versus evil. Yeah, it's a story of good versus evil. And you can't obviously implement everything into our story because there's no real. We don't have goblins. Hobbits. We don't have dragons. Right. Yeah. And so it's very everybody likes a good story, right? And we live in a story. We are characters in stories, and so we love stories. That's the story written by God. We crave good stories. And the reason we know good stories are good is because they match God's architecture of the world that the author created, matches the architecture and the way good and evil function to the real world when God. So why? So are you gonna let your kids watch Harry Potter? No. What about Lord of the Rings? Maybe, I don't know. The reason I say watch Harry Potter is I'd prefer they read the books first. I've never read Harry Potter. I'm not a big fan, and I'm pretty sure most kids kind of like the things their parents like. But the reason Harry Potter is bad is not because there's magic in it. It's because the magic is the source of magic. One is yourself. Two, it's used for selfish purposes. Harry Potter never has to work and do anything. It just the magic literally is magical. It just
gives you, you say a spell and boom, food appears. That's not the function of Gandalf's magic. Gandalf's magic is specifically for the purpose and role that he was created for, and it's used only to resist evil. In Harry Potter, magic is just blatantly used for random goofs and giggles.
In Lord of the Rings, is there a creator?
Yes.
Who is it?
It's God. It's the Christian God.
No, I mean, like, in the story, I don't remember, like, there being too much mentioning.
There's no theological hierarchy, like, overarching narrative in Lord of the Rings. Tolkien was a Christian. He was a Catholic, but not out of necessarily conviction, but the reason Tolkien became Catholic was because of his childhood, and that's kind of it's a longer story. Read about Tolkien if you're interested in him. But
what was it? Was it Lewis and Tolkien that were friends?
Yeah. In fact, Lewis became a Christian because of Tolkien. Lewis was an atheist prior to interacting with Tolkien, and Tolkien actually made him become Christian, and so they had a long relationship there. Did
C.S. Lewis? He couldn't convince Tolkien to convert out of Catholicism.
I don't. The reason. Okay, quick story. The reason Tolkien was a Catholic was because when he was young, he was orphaned. His dad died and his mom died. And the only person who actually took him in and took care of him for his child being raised was a Catholic priest. And so out of and no Anglican would take him in, and out of respect for the Catholic priest, he was kind of brought up in that. And so, and again, all Catholics are different, and I'm pretty sure there are Catholics who are going to heaven because they believe in Christ alone. They just have a muddled theology. This is not a discussion about Catholicism, but in general, like that's where. But Tolkien's background is thoroughly Christian, and in fact, Tolkien and Lewis use medieval Norse mythology, like the dwarves and dragons, and this idea of mountains and ancient spells and ants, not ants as in like your aunt, your brothers,
like Ant-Man.
Ant as in the big trees. All these are Nordic mythology.
Aren't those Ents?
Ents, yeah. Well,
I think.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say. Like, it's not ant, it's Ents. Like
with an E.
Yeah, and like all these portrayals of creatures are steeped in Norse mythology, and they're just stories.
Well, wasn't it like? Didn't Tolkien want there to be a British mythology because there wasn't much?
There was the Arthurian legend in regards to King Arthur and Excalibur, and in fact, if you read C.S. Lewis, he talks about the last magician in like Britain, which would be Murloc, the magician from the Arthur story, and the way C.S. Lewis writes him is very interesting. He writes him as a good warlock or as a good magician. And if you want to read that, it's the Space Trilogy. The last book would be That Hideous Strength. That's beside the point. And so you have like architectures in which you could portray magic as a force for good in certain architectures of stories and how you create a narrative.
Yeah. There's this interesting verse I saw today that reminded me of this topic. I was listening to a Living Waters podcast, and they were talking about like how Christians should consume media, and they were talking about this verse, Acts 17, verse 21. It says, "Now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new." And in the podcast, they were talking about like Ray Comfort. He's saying like, "Man, I just thought this was like really weird that they would just do this like all day long." And then he's like, "Wait a second. A lot of us are doing this today. Like a lot of Christians and a lot of non-Christians both are just like over consuming like just pointless media to the point where it's like, hey, we want something new. We want something new content, new." And that's kind of like goes into the like the news, how you could be over consumed by like what's going on new and stuff. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, news is the addiction to news is the desire to know or be in the in, knowing what's going on. And it creates a lot of anxiety because all news essentially nowadays is based on fear, right? It is to portray the world as scary, and then you are essentially addicted to it because you need to know what's next
Yeah.
to not be afraid. But the very next thing is just more fear.
Like you'll get a lot more views if you go and interview people at a abortion rally if they start fighting you.
Yeah.
If there's a
excitement,
conflict.
right? We're always drawn to. I mean, it's not
Which is-
bad that we're drawn to excitement. We just have to be excited about things that actually make us better and
Yeah.
strive for holiness.
But isn't
and,
isn't it kind of sinful to have that desire for like violence? Like just like if you would see a car accident and be like, "Don't look." Yeah, like everybody wants to look.
Well, we should look. That's what we're like. We are curious human beings. In regards to violence, we shouldn't glorify pointless violence because we are, created in the image of God, and so destroy a human being to wreck the image of God is to desecrate it, and that's sinful. And yet, violence is something that we should all understand and acknowledge. There's a difference between a movie like John Wick, where there's just violence for the sake of violence, and a movie like Saving Private Ryan, where it portrays the actual realities of what war is and the brutal consequences of what happened at World War II, the memory that should linger, and the portrayal of what the brave 18, 16 to 17-year-old kids that lied on their applications to join the war did to protect and preserve freedom in the United States and to free millions of Jews from extermination. Violence is it exists in this world, and so we have to learn to deal with it.
Jeff Durbin talks about, he's a pastor. He talks about he enjoys John Wick because of the
choreographed scenes.
Yeah, they're very, very accurate in the way they do mixed martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
It's very accurate.
And so he enjoys that specific aspect of it, and you can't wrong him for that. But as a story, John Wick kind of sucks because there's no isness to it. Essentially the story of John Wick is a dog's life is more valuable than a human life. That's essentially the story of John Wick, right? And biblically, that's inverted. Human beings are created in the image of God, not animals. But that's a different discussion, right? And so
so it's about a dog. Or you're saying that's the general concept?
No, there are themes in movies and in books and in stories. And you have to be a thinking Christian to say that's the theme that's being portrayed in this story. And that's God glorifying, or that's veering away from the narrative that God portrays in this world. And so you have to be discerning. You can't just be obliviously, you can't just say that movie has killing in it and therefore Christian could never watch it. That's then don't read your Bible, because the Bible is full of rape, murder, atrocities. Name a sin, the Bible has it. And so there are ways to portray things in which they glorify God and still address the realities of the world.
Yeah. What do you think about we grew up for maybe some of our life there wasn't cell phones, in our early life, but now there is cell phones, and our next generation they're gonna grow up always knowing that there's been cell phones. How does that affect our lives?
I don't know. I think a lot of times it's overblown. Yes, social media exists, and we're all affected by it. Yes, cell phone exists, but also for thousands of years, discipline existed too, right? And you could choose to take a vice and leave a vice, and obviously now vices are a lot more prevalent in your pocket, and yet discipline still exists. God is the same God who gives the same power to every generation, and so this is the same conversation people had when the television was invented, and now television is like an irrelevant thing.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal, right? We used to think that the television was literally especially in the Slavic community, like the television was an idol. It was the devil. Like the devil had created television, and that was a big thing. And I think there's this misconception in popular culture, and I could be wrong about this totally, that social media and cell phones are the cause of the problem with all these, anxiety issues and attention deficit disorders.
Yeah.
Like that's true, but also like don't give your kid a cell phone. Teach your kids to be disciplined. Like the applicational aspects of how to be a good human being that's God glorifying has never changed. It's just a different tool, and use it wisely.
Yeah, like there's a poll, and like a lot of people would say they wish the internet never existed because they think the world was a lot better before the internet.
Oh, really? Have you tried getting insurance without internet? Have you tried, finding a home without internet, or looking up directions? Good luck, And so, no, like the internet is a tool like anything else. It can be used for great good or for horrendous evil. Imagine, so.
But also millions of more people are being reached as there's more internet, and a phenomenon is coming on as like Starlink is getting more popular in very scattered places. This is internet that could be reached to very, very rural areas. People are going to be able to have access to internet and access to the gospel a lot more readily.
Yeah, I think a lot of Slavic Christians think that the last godly technology that was invented was the radio. And after the radio, everything was invented by Satan, right? Everything visual started being satanic, right? And so I think that, again, you should be a thinking Christian. You should view music and movies and books and media and Joe Rogan and everything else and recognize, like, I can acknowledge that what Joe Rogan says or some other podcaster says or some movie portrays something, like, very sexually promiscuous, like, that's evil. Like, that's not what my heart wants. I'm not going to participate in listening to that or watching that. And yet, you could say, like, this part specifically is very wise and important. And everyone has their own tolerances of what they are capable of skipping through or not skipping through or ignoring or not ignoring, right?
I'm just worried with, like, I kind of feel like some people grow up, like, very, very sheltered, and then they go to the other extreme where everything, if you're abstaining from this movie, like, if I'm like talking to a Christian, I'm like, no, I don't watch those movies, and they kind of look at me, they kind of look at you legalistic.
Yeah, and it's like, well,
I'm like, no, I don't want to go and watch that movie because I looked it up, and there's gonna be a man where it's gonna show his butt, and it's like, well, that's a small thing. It's like, yeah, but like, what else do they have that they didn't show? It's like, it's not.
So if you are watching a movie that's sexually explicit, like, I'm not gonna put myself in that position. That's sinful. That's pornographic. I'm not gonna do that. Or if there is, like, just the whole entire movie is F-bombs, like, why would I participate in that? I don't enjoy that as a Christian because I love God. I like wholesome things, right? And so, like, you can do that, but at the same time, if you're watching, like, Saving Private Ryan again, like, there are expletives in that movie, but the reason there are expletives in that movie is because it's wartime. Like, it portrays reality, and you could choose. Like, some people can't and say, like, that's sinful. Like, well, yes, it's portraying something that was in fact sinful. It was war. War is sinful. And yet there is redemption in that. And then there's bravery. And in the midst of that sinfulness, God is saving people through the Allies rescuing the Jews. And so, again, there is this, like, if you just read your Old Testament, if you just read, 1 Samuel, you recognize, like, the Bible talks about some horrific things. And again, like, use wisdom, use common sense, and just know that, like, you can watch, like, there are filters, like VidAngel, that skip through sexually explicit scenes. They take out all the expletives and the cuss words from a movie, and you can just watch a movie that's clean. And, like, it's a great story, and so you want to watch the movie for the story. Like, you are as a Christian are capable of doing that without sinning. And if your conscience condemns you, don't. And then don't, I think there's also that idea, like, well, I can do all things because I'm a Christian. Nothing's going to taint me. I have freedom in Christ. You have freedom in Christ to be holy, not to be, wallowing in filth. And so just discernment in that sometimes is challenging.
Yeah, because ultimately, like, if you don't feel good after watching like something, it's because you have the Holy Spirit in you and you feel like you've sinned. And
Yeah.
that's gonna just lead you.
Yeah, don't let
That-
your
that-
conscience condemn you.
Yeah, and it could lead you to feel far away from God and just not walking in the Spirit, and that could lead you to just being less and less sanctified. Like your general, like those who are pure in heart, they will see God.
Yeah.